So Strider was a great arcade game. Big sprites, fun flips and flops, big sword swipes, great stuff. So while they were making the arcade game, Capcom was also working on an 8-bit version of Strider for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which was its own thing and eventually saw release in 1989. This is also one of the few NES games not to get a Japanese Famicom release. Not that there weren't any plans, but they never came to fruition, so we only got this Western release. And anyway, Strider has you in control of Hiryu, a Strider charged with the task of killing his buddy Kane. Yes, a Nintendo game wants you to kill, outright murder your best buddy. Maybe there's something to these violent debates. Maybe not. Maybe you're looking too much into it. Maybe I don't care. Yes, that's it. Anywho, Strider's a side-scroller. There's some action, there's some platforming, there's some discs and keys you'll have to collect, there's tricks you'll have to learn, and there's some incredibly spotty jumping physics and collision detection that is the very epitome of foobar. The general premise is you infiltrate various locations, recover some files represented by floppy disks, and then analyze them in your Blue Dragon command ship, which will unveil a new location for you to explore. You'll also come across doors that require you to be in possession of certain keys before you could access what's beyond those doors, and whenever you accomplish a major task, you'll level up, which means your max HP and energy will increase, and you'll gain a couple new tricks, whether it be a new slide move or special powers that can be activated via the menu here, and only provided that you have the points to use said powers. Basically, there's a bit of backtracking as you're getting new files and keys to open up more of the game world, and naturally, there's also special boots with special traits, like being able to walk on water or scale magnetic walls and such. There's a bit of an open world element to Strider, but despite this, progress is still very much a linear experience, and the potential to explore is somewhat limited. The most you could hope for in this regard is finding a stray room with hidden power-ups that you could attack to reveal themselves, and then there's poison cans that could harm or even kill you, best to avoid these at all cost. Oftentimes, when discussing less than stellar games, or subpar games even, I'll usually claim that if said game had more time to cook and had a little more polish on a couple things, it could have been a decent game, or maybe even a good one. Strider on NES is the textbook example of a game needing more time to cook, and a large part of this has to do with control. Specifically, Hiryu's jumping physics are broken and borderline useless. The jumps themselves are awkward, and it is entirely possible to drop to the ground in mid-leap. There's also an issue with collision detection as it relates to interacting with solid objects. This is evident in navigating moving platforms in which there is a probability of landing on one and just slipping off or just getting stuck in walls and such. This is also evident when attempting the acceleration jump, which involves running down a slope and then jumping to cover a greater distance, though this does not always work. But the pinnacle of this broken physics engine crap is in the wall jump, a move that shouldn't be a problem, but because collision and jumping physics are shit in Strider, trying to hug a wall to attempt a jump will cause Hiryu to drop to the floor. And there's only a couple instances where you need to do the wall jump to advance, and one occasion where you need to do it twice. And let me tell you something, if you can't pull this wall jump off, you may as well shut the game off now and walk away. And then come back with a password that lets you skip the offending part entirely, and I have no shame in going that route. If you're not going to give me a function that functions, then I'm going to circumvent that shit and be done with it. Is it fair? No, but you know what? I don't give a fuck. That's why I don't have an ulcer, because I know when to say I don't give a fuck. And it's not like Control is pitch perfect either. It works for the most part. Except for when you're aiming your cipher upwards and you're just stalling there for a bit, which leaves you open to a pounding. And also after you drop out of these Sonic-esque chutes, you'll be frozen in place for a few seconds, which leaves you open to a pounding. And you know, this is something you would expect from a crap game from a crap developer like Color Dreams, not from a company like Capcom, who was responsible for a number of high-quality NES games. So there's a standard of quality that Strider fails to reach. And that's unfortunate that the control and the jumping physics are such a broken mess, because the rest of Strider is perfectly sound. A somewhat open-world action platformer where you occasionally learn new moves and skills, level up to expand the number of hit points and energy points. The tricks you eventually learn are fun to use, provided you have enough energy to pull them off, especially the jump ability, which negates the need for that crippled wall jump. There's actually a decent plot behind this game, which makes it fairly intriguing to follow. It's based on a manga of sorts. And for my misgivings about the game's crippling issues, I'd be lying if I said that Strider was a miserable experience. The game itself is fine. It is somewhat playable to a degree for the most part, aside from the one glaring, fundamentally fucked up segment. Even in the grand scheme of things, Strider isn't perfect. Enemies will drop out of nowhere and give you no time to react, and sometimes they'll spawn in places where they really shouldn't. Hiryu has virtually no invincibility frames, but sometimes he'll bounce when taking a hit and other times he won't, so you could easily take multiple hits that sees your hit points drop down hard. And finally, you only have one life, and once you die, an annoying jingle will play before you're unceremoniously dumped back to the title screen. The game does have a password system, and it is what it is, but to the game's credit, the last password is kept in memory until you shut the system off. So you don't have to type in the same password each time you want to continue, so that's a nice little quality of life thing. All that said, there is one cool aspect that I kind of dig. When you're on the Blue Dragon, you have three options. Transfer, which picks a stage for you to play, Analyze, which lets you analyze files you've recovered, or Password, which gives you a password to resume your progress before booting you back to the title screen. But not before you get a little next time blurb that reads like a preview for the next episode of a TV show. That's adorable, I like that. The game controls like ass, but it has style at least, and I can appreciate that. Strider is a fine looking game. Great opening sequence. That blue dragon looks superb. Good mugshots. Some of the sprite animation is a bit awkward at times, but otherwise the pixel art is pretty solid, both in terms of the character designs and also some of the backdrops that you'll be exploring. There are some odd quirks. Sometimes sprites will occasionally glitch out and turn into random characters for a moment or two, which basically adds to the game's unbaked state. Some weird colors will pop up on screen sometimes, and there's also some poor choice translations here and there, but that's the low bar on the list of issues plaguing Strider. Sound's also pretty good. Yeah, there's a couple crap sound effects that sound bad. The shutters sound like an alarm clock being set off, but the soundtrack's great. Great Kazan theme, which is good because you're revisiting this place a couple times. The intermission music that plays during the pause menu and the password screen's pretty good. And hey, did you know that opening bit was supposed to come with lyrics for the Famicom release that never happened? I read it on the internet, so it must be true. But yeah, you have a great set of tunes here to go along with a mixed set of sound effects, so yeah, there you go. Strider on NES is not a bad game. I don't think so anyway. But it is a broken game. A game broken by its crappy, broken controls and wonky, dilapidated physics that cripples an otherwise decent little action game with some open-world exploration and story bits thrown in for good measure. If not for that one major flaw, Strider could have been one of the Capcom greats on the NES. And yet despite the poor controls, Strider isn't completely unplayable. There is something that can, barely, be salvaged here, and if one has the patience to put up with the one glaring issue, they'll find a fairly intriguing and quite engaging little action game. Doing so means overcoming one significant hurdle, but again, if you can manage, there is a decent game to be found in Strider. Otherwise, I'd steer clear of this one. There are much better action games on the NES worth your time. You know what this needed? This needed more land spoil. Actually, forget I said anything. Let's just... whatever. Never mind.